He's a businessman, owns many businesses, lifelong Republican, Sunday school teacher, and rings the bell for the Salvation Army and other good things, and I'm going to let him tell you the rest. Vance Patterson.
What a great group of people you've got here. I see the reflection of Sheriff Shield in a lot of you, the emotion and the interest in the community and just the well-being for the people that live here. So, way to go for showing up today. I'm proud of you. I'm going to talk about a crisis that is coming. Now, we've heard about a lot of crises coming out of this administration, but the crisis I'm talking about dwarfs the others in its direct impact on you and your families. I'm talking about an economic crisis. An economic crisis that can threaten our standard of living, our leadership role in the world, and the quality of life for our future generations. The generations we'll never meet. They're going to look back on us and say, what were you thinking to allow such a mess to happen with America after your parents left you such a great America? Our economy tanked 3 years ago, and it's been flat ever since. Do you know that 9 of the last 11 recessions lasted less than a year? And this one's been going on for 3.5 years now. The worst part is what's coming next, and it's scary. The massive debt that we've been accumulating, it's over $15 trillion now, and it's growing by $1 trillion a year. And Obamacare doesn't start until 2013. When Obamacare starts and that massive debt hits, what economic activity we've got going is going to be crushed. The last time we had an economic crisis like this was back during the Nixon-Ford-Carter era. Started in 1970. And I know most of the people in here remember it like I do. I just finished my education in 1972. My wife and I got married in '74. We moved 9 times our first 10 years of marriage while I worked to find a job that would last. In 1979, I started my first company. It was a restaurant. It lasted 2 years. In 1981, I lost my business. We lost our house. My young wife and I had a 2-year-old, an infant. She was pregnant again, and we had no health insurance. One of her biggest worries was whether the hospital was going to let us back in because we hadn't finished paying for the second child. Those were different days back then. And of course they let us back in. It wasn't to be worried about, but she was really concerned about it. And I still owed the government over $50,000 in back taxes due to business losses. So what did we do? Well, we moved again, something we were pretty good at. But we adapted. We did more with less. We rented, we started over. I was 31 years old. The big difference between what was going on back then and what's happening right now is inflation. Not just inflation. We had what we call hyperinflation. It was up to 15%. And it was a staggering burden on everybody. There's an economist that a guy named Arthur Oken, who came up with an index to measure how we were doing on a monthly basis. Does anybody remember what that index was called?
It's Misery Index.
The Misery Index. Oh, what leadership we had back then.
Oh, perfect.
Misery Index was a combination of adding unemployment and inflation together. It got up to 22 under President Jimmy Carter in 1978. Now they say in government, don't worry about inflation for another 2 or 3 years. It won't be a problem. Well, I don't know what store they're shopping at, but when I go to the grocery and I see the faces of people shopping, they're scared as to how they're going to pay those prices and feed their families. Bread, milk, eggs, margarine, vegetables, meat, everything going out of sight. And in business, we watch the commodity prices because they affect retail prices. Corn and cotton have almost doubled in the last year. And copper in the metals market has gone up 300% in the last 18 months. When those commodity prices work their way through the system into retail, we could be right back into that hyperinflation again. Right back into those Nixon, Ford, Carter years. That economic crisis lasted 17 years. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to wait 15 to 20 years for this crisis to pass. And I don't want to leave it to our future generations. So what do? Well, if it was a military crisis, we'd go to the military. If it was an immigration crisis, we could go to law enforcement. If it was okay. Yeah. I've got comments on that, as far as Border Patrol and everything. But if it was a judicial crisis, we could go to the judges and attorneys, or a constitutional crisis. This is an economic crisis. And we need to go to those who live with the economy day and night, who take it home with them because they're not just worried about putting the food on the table for their families. They're worried about providing a place for their employees to work so their employees can put food on the table for their families. I'm talking about the business owners. The business owners are the ones who know you can't kick a problem down the road for someone else to solve, and that blaming it on someone else doesn't do any good. The business owners are the ones who know you've got to get all the right answers out on the table, select the best right answer, and then move to confront the problem, turn it around, and lead in the right direction. That's why you're hearing more and more people say, we need more businessmen in Washington. But not just businessmen, we need business owners. So who am I to be saying all this? Well, as Don said, I'm Vance Patterson, neighbor of yours down in Burke County. I'm a father of 4, married 37 years to my wife, Mary Jo. I am an American businessman. And by that, I mean I use American ingenuity, the American work ethic, the American free enterprise system to start companies and create jobs. I've started 16 companies. 2 of them made the Inc. 500 list for the 500 fastest growing companies in America.
Really? Congratulations.
Twice, I've been a finalist for Entrepreneur of the Year here in our Southeast region. I currently own and operate 4 companies. Now, 3 of the companies got crushed in 2008 when we entered the Great Recession. But I'm proud to say I've got the best employees in the world, and we turned all 3 of them around in a year. And all 3 are now stronger than they were when we went into the recession. Now, the 4th company actually started in 2009, right after I spoke at the first Tea Party in Burke County on April 15th. It was the first time I'd ever spoken in public, and we had over 500 people there. And my wife and I were driving home, and I was really excited, and we were talking, and I said, you know, there's a market here for something. So we talked about it a little bit, and I called the office and talked to Thomas. He's my number 2 guy. I said, Thomas, there's a market here for something. There were over 500 people here, and they all made their own banners, and their own signs, and T-shirts. Well, I said the right thing, because Thomas had been interested in doing T-shirts for about 5 years. Within 3 weeks, we had a machine in, and we were silk screening T-shirts. We started a company called Frenzy. Frenzy will be the 3rd company we take to the Inc. 500 in the next 2 years. It's doing very well. Now, another one of the companies manufactures industrial fans. We actually make things out of metal, ship them across the country and around the world. I am a manufacturer. Doing business around the world, I've learned many things, especially about the cultures and the people around the world. I've negotiated and done business in Scotland, England, all across Europe to Greece. I've negotiated and done business in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Central America, South America, and in China. And I learned that it is so important to know the cultures of these other countries, not just in doing business, but in world politics and trying to be a world leader, as America is. Back in 1995, I set up a company, joint venture, over in Russia to manufacture our fans. We were going to ship our materials over there, do the final assembly in Moscow, and then distribute through Eastern Europe. formed a joint venture with a company called Movan. Movan was the Moscow ventilation company set up in 1937 under the Stalin era. I flew over there by myself to really finalize the agreement, terms that we'd already talked about. We went into negotiations. It was just me and 8 Russians. They had sales and marketing and engineering and legal and just a whole group of people in this room. We negotiated hard for 3 days because I soon realized we were not close to a deal. They'd make a proposal and I would counter and we'd go on. Well, they made this one proposal and I countered and they came back with the same proposal again. And I sat there, and being the only one American in the room, I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I sat there for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And I'm thinking to myself, this deal is blown. There is no way I'm going to do this. And I couldn't think of anything to say. Fortunately, the Russians are fairly patient people. But finally, I just pushed back from the table, got up and walked away. And it was the exact right thing to do.
Sure.
The Russians stood up and they said, yes, we'll take a break. So we go in the other room and we eat some hard salami and some bread and drank some plum juice and ate some cheese and talked a little more. And then we came back in and we put the deal together. And it was on my terms. And it lasted 6 years. It was a good deal. What I learned was, I was the only American in the room. And they knew that if they weren't dealing with me, they weren't going to deal with America. And all the world knows that if you're not dealing with America, you're not a global player. Our government needs to realize that when they're negotiating with these other countries, that we are the Americans. We are the center of the global economy. We have the most potential for growth and the greatest free enterprise system in the world. We need to remember that. Another quick note in dealing with, and I'll do this real quick. This is Brazil. In Brazil, the culture down there says if you and I sit down and negotiate, and you get up and leave your camera sitting on the table, you come back and I have your camera. I didn't steal your camera. I was just more clever than you. Because see, before you had your camera, and now I have it. And in Brazil, that's not stealing. Now, they're not a bunch of thieves down there. It's just their culture, and you've got to know that when dealing with these other countries.
Thanks, Matt.
Let me give you a real quick rundown on where I stand on some of the issues. I favor tax reform to simplify our system, to get rid of the social engineering that's in it. And by social engineering, I mean, if I want you to do something, I'll give you a tax break. If I don't want you to do it, I'm going to tax you. That is social engineering. And that is what has got our tax system up to 76,000 pages of taxes that nobody understands. We need to get rid of that. Our tax system should be do 2 things. Pay to defend our country and pay our bills. And that's it. It ought to be off to the side, a non-issue. I'm in favor of term limits. I believe our founding fathers would be stunned to know there's such a thing as a professional politician. Because they weren't our founding politicians. They were our founding fathers who had families and homes and they couldn't wait to get back to them once their work was complete. We need to get back to that. I stand strong on the Second Amendment. I've been a gun owner since I was 6 years old. I believe in free trade among states and fair trade among countries. And there's a huge difference between the two. Something our government didn't realize when it did NAFTA. NAFTA should be rolled back and renegotiated based on what's best for America. I support the Defense of Marriage Act. One man, one woman, traditional marriage, no exceptions.
Amen.
I am against all forms of abortion. I will stand up to political correctness. And the first stand I'll make is to affirm God in government. Not religion in government, but God in government. G.K. Chesterton, the famous poet back in the 1920s and 30s, G.K. Chesterton wrote, "Once abolish the God from government, and the government becomes the God." We see that happening with a government that wants us to come to it for all our needs. And we need to stop doing that. We need to reestablish that culture of self-reliance. because self-reliance gives us self-determination. This was something that Deputy Shields was talking about. Self-reliance, doing more with less, using American ingenuity to come up with the programs they came up with. Who would have thought of getting the criminals to donate to a system that would benefit so many people? That's American ingenuity. That's not government. We've got some tremendous problems that need to be addressed. And paramount of these problems is this economic crisis coming at us. How did this happen? And why is it continuing to happen? Well, it started back in 1913 under President Wilson and all the liberal agenda that began at that time. Since 1913, we've had wave after wave of socialism pounding against our Constitution and eroding our freedoms. We need to be that force in nature that steps up to those angry waves and says, thus far and no farther. And then as in nature, begin rolling those waves back, rebuilding our Constitution and reestablishing our freedoms. I agree with those people who believe we're at a tipping point here in America. That it can go one way over a cliff with socialism and become a European socialist republic destined to failure, as they're failing right now. Or we can begin reestablishing that culture of self-reliance that our ancestors used to set this country up, that our founding fathers used to set up our government. A culture that says, if I'm relying on myself and I don't owe anybody anything, I can determine my own future. This is the kind of America that we need. When we were growing up, could you imagine America borrowing money from a communist country?
No.
What in the world? Or that the Arab countries over in the Middle East would be determining how our economy would work just by raising and lowering the cost of oil. We need to drill our oil, mine our coal, tap our natural gas, use atomic energy. I couldn't think of the word. Having a Rick Perry moment up here.
Nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy, there you go. Or nuclear if you want to be from Texas.
Whichever.
Yeah. That kind of self-reliance on our own energy will allow us to determine our future. Get back to doing what's best for America. This coming election should be a moment of personal responsibility for each of you to look at the list of candidates and decide which one's the most qualified to attack these problems. In business, when we've got a challenge or a job to be done, we don't hire our friends. You do not hire your friends in business. You look at the list of candidates and decide which one is the most qualified. Who's got the experience, the background? Who's got the creativity to put together a plan, a business plan, to attack the problem and turn it around? This coming election should be a moment of clarity where you all look and see that America's best days are ahead of us. Under American ingenuity, American work ethic, American free enterprise system, and a government that stays out of our way. Should be a moment of clarity where you see that our district can return to prosperity now under strong conservative leadership. We don't have to wait on the rest of the country. We don't have to wait on the rest of the state. Heck, half the state doesn't even know we're here because we're west of I-77.
That's right.
Manufacturing is coming back. I know, I'm a manufacturer. I see it happening. It's not coming back in the same form that it left. It's not going to be the 500 and 1,000 employee big companies. It's going to be the 25 to 100 employee companies. The ones that are more dedicated to their employees and employees more dedicated to the company. There'll be jobs that cannot be exported. We have to prepare our district for those jobs, for those companies. We have to put forth a business plan that will bring them to our communities and not just wait for it to happen. That's what's always happened in the past. Let's get a good foundation up in New York, up in Washington, lower taxes, reduce government spending, reduce the size of government, and then what? Wait. We don't have to wait. With strong conservative leadership and someone who knows how to put a plan together. So I'm asking you, when you go into the privacy of that voting booth, to have the responsibility to look at the list of candidates and determine which one is the most qualified. If you were spending your own money, which one would you hire to work for your family? I'm asking you for this job. I'm asking you to vote and hire me on May 8th. Thank you.
Take some questions?
Absolutely. I really enjoy questions, yes.